This week on Generating Alpha, in an episode unlike most, I'm joined by Mickey Drexler, one of the most legendary figures in modern retail and brand building. Known as the Merchant Prince, Mickey transformed Gap into a global powerhouse, turned J.Crew into a cultural icon, and has advised some of today's most influential consumer companies, including Apple. Few leaders have had as a profound an impact as he has on how we think about brands, style, and the consumer experience. Now, you might be wondering why feature Mickey Drexler on an investing podcast? While he doesn't come from Wall Street, Mickey offers invaluable lessons on leadership, culture, and the art of building enduring brands. His insights cut across industries and speak directly to anyone who's trying to create something that lasts. That's why this is part of my first two-part series for him. In this episode, we explore Mickey's early life and what shaped his relentless curiosity, the rise of Gap during its golden years, and how he developed his instinct for spotting and shaping cultural trends before anyone else. More importantly, we dig into his philosophy of leadership, how to hire, how to inspire, and how to build organizations that stand the test of time. The second part of this two-part series is coming out in 2 weeks. If you enjoyed this conversation, please follow the podcast and rate it a 5 star on Spotify. Subscribe to the YouTube channel and share it with anyone who would find Mickey's story as inspiring as I do. Thank you, and I really appreciate it. Thank you
Yeah.
for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Well, it's my pleasure, Amir. I've been looking forward to this since you called me the eighth time to come on. So, but you have pretty good credentials, and I'm excited to schmooze.
I'm very excited to schmooze as well. And I want to start this schmooze from the beginning. So tell me about your childhood. How did kind of growing up in the Bronx and the relationship you had with your father shape kind of your perspective?
Yeah, and you probably heard my comments about him, right?
Yes.
And I grew up in the 40s and 50s. Well, I lived there in the Bronx through high school. Um, and I lived now it's not the way you say a lot of people live, but then the Bronx, Barnes Avenue, was a very kind of, I don't want to call it a working class family, a neighborhood, but it was mostly Jews and Italians. It was near Allerton Avenue, which was our main shopping street. One elevated stop north of Pelham Parkway, which most people know because Bronx Zoo, a hospital. I had one aunt who lived there. Anyway, we lived in a ground floor apartment on it's kind of noisy because it was everyone used to play handball or ball in the courtyard, which I lived on. And I um, so I wouldn't trade it. Now, when you check dots backwards, you always see what the miserable times might have been good for, how they helped. But my father was not a nice person. Took me many years to admit that. I but I was Jewish family. I went to temple on the high holidays. The shul was exactly across the street from my building, and now it's a mosque. But that's been for years, and of course, neighborhoods change. So I my mom was ill from when I was born. She got breast cancer. And so she had a very depressing early life and she passed away. It took 16 years. But my three aunts, it was like a kibbutz down the street. My three aunts and seven cousins lived, one in Pelham Parkway and the other two in my grandparents', you know, house, 2 floors. One of my aunts lived with grandparents and her family, and the other on the ground floor of the house. So that was my family in a sense. I hated being at home because now a lot of this is hindsight. I didn't like being at home because it was very hard dealing with my mom, and because she was very depressed. She always worked. She was a secretary to the head of a YMHA in the South Bronx. And my dad was a wannabe big shot, but he was not successful. He worked in the garment business. in the shipping room. He bought buttons and piece goods, and he acted like a big shot. He was probably on the spectrum, but I didn't know what that meant, nor did anyone in those days. And he wasn't kind. He wasn't warm. He was a big shot in his own mind, but I saw through that. But he forced me to work, which was okay on the weekends in the garment business for his boss. So I always had a working discipline. And when I went to as a kid, well, I worked when I was in grade school sorting towels. My uncle delivered towels. I don't know if you read that or not, but
I
and
didn't.
then I went to Bronx Science. Thank God, I got in and made a big difference in my life because I was the first one and the only one of eight Jewish cousins in the '60s who went to college, which is kind of rare in those days. And I delivered the New York Times uh, at Bronx Science Annex. I lost my job 6 months later because we moved to a new building right next door to DeWitt Clinton. So I went there. I really, as I said I spoke at graduation 2 years ago, and I didn't tell the students, who were mostly first generation, that because the parents wouldn't have, they would have booed me out of the auditorium if I said, well, I didn't like science. I was intimidated. I didn't have confidence as a kid. Uh, and and I told them that I didn't tell them I didn't like. I certainly didn't tell the graduating class that I didn't learn anything in college, and I don't. This is true. I don't care where people go to college. They don't learn to do most things in college, and I lived in my fantasies, mostly imagination, because I wanted to escape my early life, and that lasts. You don't escape easily. But I never kind of felt like a victim. I wasn't at Bronx Science. I felt not smart because Phil Heller, who sat next to me, every test was an A+. I stopped asking him, and he wasn't the most exciting, warm guy, but A+, whatever. And then I ended up, because my mom had passed, my father really didn't pay attention. So I went to City College for 2 years. And I did that because I didn't know where else to apply. I didn't do very well in my board scores, which disappointed me, but I took them again and I did very well. I was very pleased about that. I didn't have a lot of self-esteem, but then, I really, whatever. But I got into science on the test, so that was something. People think everyone who goes to a good college or Bronx Science is extra smart. Sometimes you're school smart, you're street smart. I didn't have the patience to listen in school. Oh, the other thing with my father, big shot that he was, I used to work in the shipping room there. And one day they asked me, whoever they is, to take the payroll to the bank. So I'm thinking, wow, they give me the payroll. Everyone's pay is in there. I take the freight elevator down to 37th and 8th, where it was. I tuck in to the freight elevator next door. I go through the payroll. And I'll never forget this. My dad, who was a big shot, quote unquote, was one of the lowest paid people at Jill Jr., which was the woman's coat company. And I was devastated. But it was good because then my fantasy was punctured completely. He is what he is. And I always hoped that he could be a boss, he could be this, and then I wouldn't have to worry in my life. But it is what it is. And all these little setbacks you have, it's all part of growing up, it's part of the game. And so I went to City College for 2 years. I had to escape because my father remarried. I don't want to go too much into this, but let's say it was not a description of what I'd want a step family to be like, like whatever. And so I moved to a suburb of New York. I'm disguising where it is. They had a ranch house on the railroad tracks, and the family was whatever. Anyway, I was, I guess, 19 when he remarried. I was a sophomore at City College. I was commuting, subway. It didn't matter. I mean, who knew from whatever? And I felt I had to escape and I needed to leave, get out, do what I have to do because I was extremely unhappy there. And I'll tell you some off the record crazy stories. Uh, anyway, so I applied. I didn't know where to apply to college. Some guy I knew's son went to Buffalo State School. So I applied. Thank God I got in and I escaped. Thank God. And that was another, there's all these turning points in your life: Bronx science, escaping, having a miserable childhood. I like adversity. I look today to people who have had adversity, unlike most of the people I kind of know. And but I interview everyone. I've always interviewed tons of people, and you can interrupt me anytime you want, by the way. And I look, I used to be very impressed with fancy
Yeah.
schools. I didn't know any rich kids growing up until I went to overnight camp. Now, rich in those days, in the 50s or 60s, could have been a Cadillac convertible, but I hadn't been out. I used to go to the Catskills every summer, bungalow colonies, and I never knew that there was a better life out there until I knew. I visited a friend in Riverdale. I said, "Oh my God, this is fancy." So, but I always had this inner drive, I guess, and got, uh, I got hit down, or whatever. I bounced up. In hindsight, because when you're going through all this, I mean, what I lived through in my early life, I kind of thank in my second half of my life. But I was pretty scarred as a kid, but I got by. Uh, and I in school, I just wanted to pass. That's all I cared about. I didn't have patience. There's a Yiddish term called spilkus. It's ants. Are you in the tribal? Are you a tribal member or no?
I'm a tribal member. I'm
Okay,
Jewish.
because
Yes.
Amir, I was thinking, I have a friend named Amir. But in any case, so I was not a student. I did go, so I moved to this suburb, miserable. I did that, lived there for, well, 1 year, and then I had to get out of town. So I went to Buffalo, and I really enjoyed it. I lived in a kind of a little student apartment behind the optician store. Parking lot was Kentucky Fried Chicken. But I was away, and that was a great escape for me. And but I always had depressive tendencies, no more. But in those days, I guess I had a right to have them. So 2 years at Buffalo, and then I moved back into the place I was living. Needless to say, I wasn't happy, and my dad was just not. I could tell you stories, but those are off the record. They're really big tells. I met my wife Peggy in Boston. I went to Boston University Business School. I didn't learn anything because I wasn't a student, but I avoided the trap. My friends either became teachers, National Guard, or or they kept their education going. So I did that, and when I graduated, I my first job was Bloomingdale's. And I don't know if you want to continue, but that made a big difference in my life. There's so many things that you look at that played a role. Again, connecting dots back, where you say, gee, if I would have had that job, I would have been miserable. I'm glad they underpaid me in a company I worked this summer in. And, you just go through it. And I think that's true of everyone. Everyone today, I don't know about you, but they're trying to figure out their life.
Yeah, I
When
agree.
when they're your age, the pressure's crazy, and the kids, my grandchild, that they have to experience everything on the experiential list. My first time on an airplane, it's fine. I used to go to bungalow colonies in the Catskills in the summers or overnight camp. And I wasn't on an airplane until I guess 20 years old, going to Miami with my dad, who then met his future wife there. And so I got a job at Bloomingdale's.
Yep.
I met Peggy. I was young, but in those days you kind of married young-ish, and
Yes.
now it's oldish. And I she was my family. We married a couple of years later, and she still is my family, and my kids and my close friends. So and my three aunts I was very close to, but I thank them a lot for the support, the
Yeah.
love, and they built me up in a nice way. So anyway, good.
And I'm interested in that concept of connecting dots backwards. So if you were to kind of connect the main dots of what made Mickey Drexler what he is today over your entire career, whether that be Gap, Old Navy, J.Crew, Alex Mill, take me through a couple of those dots that you think were most pivotal to who you are today.
Yeah. By the way, that's famous in Steve
By
Jobs'
Steve Jobs,
Stanford
yes,
speech.
Stanford speech, yes.
And I loved Steve for the 16 years I was with him. Enormous respect. And he didn't have a fairy tale ending and whatever. And he knew that, by the way. Um, of course he knew. Anyway, tell me the question again.
If you were to kind of connect the dots backwards, you were talking about
Yeah.
connecting the dots backwards. What are the most pivotal dots that you think really shaped
Oh,
who you are
that's a
today?
good question. You know, the good and the bad and the ugly. Pivotal was growing up with a father who was cold, not nice, and with a mother who was very depressed with, serious cancer. So that's a dot. Living in a foyer area. The way I grew up, and I walked to school when you were 5 years old in those days, and that made a difference. The way you grow up, and when I interview people today or meet young people like yourself, I don't ask them about grades, board scores, and what's a little negative for me, and I couldn't say this at the Bronx Science graduation. I don't care where people go to school, and I do have a built-in bias against fancy kids, of which one could say my grandchild, my kids, they grew up, with all the things, and I love the immigrants who work hard, and I identify with them at work here. We're small now, and even in the big companies, I interviewed everyone, and I felt either the good or the bad. And it took me 5 minutes. Today I'm confident enough to say it's 5 minutes. Energy, they're a little nervous, they're not cocky, they're this, as they should be on an interview. But it takes me no more than five. I schmooze. It's like I met them casually. Because when you meet someone casually, you kind of know if they're fast or not fast. And of course, you make a lot of mistakes. But all these little things made a difference. I had a summer job at A&S, and they on their MBA program, whatever it is, you don't learn anything on training programs. You learn something from great bosses. You learn something if you're a great detective, and I'm a detective. Everything I do, and I'm addicted to detective true crimes because good detectives solve the murders. And small towns don't have enough experience with murders or whatever. So, and I'm addicted to true crime podcasts. So I'm trying to think of where I go off on tangents all the time. So you'll edit this out, and
Yeah, but
you'll
throughout your career, what after your kind of childhood, whether that be Gap, Old Navy, J. Crew, Alex Mill, what do you
okay,
think were the
okay,
biggest dots? Yeah.
okay. Here's what happened. I worked and these are all important things. I worked at Abraham and Strauss, crappy discount department store, summer MBA, good salary. A guy I knew in my class, and I was offered a job. So, guy I knew in my class didn't know him. He wasn't a friend. Asked me to fix him up. with the HR guy. Good guy, I know him. I thought they liked me a lot, but what the fuck? Anyway, so I fix him up, and then I ran into him. I don't know, it was in Boston. I said, "How'd it go?" He goes, "Oh, I got a job offer, 11,500." I was wild. I got 11,000 offer. And when you don't realize the message, I was furious. I was pissed off. I understand now. I made the right decision. Why? Because if that's the way they are, I'm glad I went to work for Bloomingdale's, which was by far a very good decision in hindsight. Fashion company. I had a woman who was kind of mentored me. She was a fashion director. She should have been the CEO, but in those days, women were kind of,
Yeah.
not. But Katie Murphy was fantastic. And I spent 6 years there. And I loved my first 2 or 3 years because they accelerated me. I was running a business my third day there. They assigned me, and it all came natural. I was a buyer in the Lexington level. I was 23, 24 years old, and I had the open to buy. And in those, I guess I remember now, obsessed, fast, urgent, worried. And I get on the subway to go to the garment center market, and I bought the goods. I had a very nice boss, Stanley Stern. He was a lovely guy, but I think I started to learn again in hindsight. You're born with certain things. You can't learn style. You can't learn. Either you have, like, I look at symphonies. I love symphonies. I see the conductor going like this. I don't know what he's waving the sticks for, but there's certain things you're given, you're born with. I do a lot of DNA interviewing because I want to know where the parents are, what they did. In my case, I'm not sure where it came from. My grandfather was a tailor, but who knows? My father worked in the garment business in a very low level job. But anyway, but the differences were in terms of my career. Um, I uh, so I took a job at Bloomingdale's. Thank God. It was a whole different thing. It was an exciting company in those days. In fact, we do business with Bloomingdale's at the small company I'm involved in. And so I took a job at Bloomingdale's. I'll never forget. I was so turned on, and I was there. I was the fast. They tell me I was made the buyer level faster than anyone. And I guess I didn't appreciate. I was nervous every day, but I also acted. Looked at the figures, in the room. I was Department 381, 383. You would have thought I owned the company. If I didn't make my sales, I was upset. And I looked at my two departments I ran, and that I was always wanted to do well. I think I was battling the not doing well at home, at Bronx Science. City College was fine. In Buffalo, I liked escaping. I did that for 6 years. But one thing I learned very strongly over time, when you're young like that, you don't realize I didn't really. I hope they're not listening, but I really didn't. Well, I don't know who you show this to, but probably not my old friends who I didn't have the regards or respect for the bosses, and I couldn't articulate that. I loved Katie Murphy. And we had a great kind of mutual relationship. She's about 15 years older. She died young, and should have been the CEO, but that was the world then. Because women's emotional IQ, I like, and I found she was just lovely, smart, and not mercenary. I don't want to accuse all guys of that, but anyway, so I did that. And then at the end, I said, I got to get out of here. I didn't want to and I was 20, I guess I was 28. I didn't want to I looked at the proxy, it was then Federated Department Stores. And I said, I don't really want to do what the CEO does. it's not fun. And I also, I didn't have a mad, crazy mission to get rich, but um, I looked at the financials and I said, I have to wait 25 years. I had no sense. Look, a lot of money then was not a lot of money. But for me, it was having a car and whatever. And, but I said, so I quit. I get recruited by Macy's, and they did a brilliant job recruiting me because a big shot there, who was a big shot in that world, recruited me personally. I always learned from that. He got me quick. He called me at work. I was working in the branch in Stamford, Connecticut, and then I went to his apartment, and then I quit in a year and a half because it ain't what I would hoped it was going to be.
Yeah.
And most companies, and nothing against Macy's or Bloomingdale's, most people in big corporations suck up to their bosses. And do you know who has the best description and the best review of a boss? Their subordinates. And no one ever asked me what I thought of this, that, or the other one, but it really impacted my career. Thank God. And I was looking for someone to inspire me. I always say today, if you can hire your boss, do so. I also say today, it ain't the biggest deal if you know what you want to do. Kind of the flow takes you to a degree. I worked in the garment center. I loved the job, and I like the action in retail. So anyway, I went to Macy's. It's a funny story. Not really, but Peggy, I stayed a year and a half. It wasn't the culture I wanted. It was, again, got to treat the boss well. And the boss has an obligation more so to treat the people well. But I couldn't articulate what it was, but I didn't have a great sense for the people I worked with. Now, no offense, I had some good ones. And if you have a million people seeing this, I'm going to deny everything. I quit in a year and a half, and then I made a big mistake. Again, I didn't know what to do. I went to work at A&S, Abraham and Strauss again, because it was part of Federated. They recruited me, and there I am, 4.5 years. I had no idea what to do with my life. And it was, I just wanted to kind of make a nice salary. I was funny. I lived in a fancy Park Avenue building in a back cut up apartment, paid 45,000. I figured I'd get the address. Now I was on the board. I was the young whoever on the board, and I couldn't afford to live in that building ever on the apartment I wanted. So I'm thinking, what do I do? I'm 34 years old. I'm making decent salary, but whatever, not. And I just wanted to live in a nice apartment. Anyway, I get a call from a woman. I always had this great relationship with my woman friends who were quite a bit older and more experienced. She recommended, um, oh, I don't know what happened. I'm sorry, I left the business out. So I went from A&S and I became the CEO of Ann Taylor. Now, no one ever puts that on my thing, and a big deal. I said no twice. I had a dinner with a friend of mine, fancy, rich, but I admired him. He was smart. He said, "What's going on?" I said, "I turned down the CEO job at Ann Taylor twice." Said to me Sunday night, he said, "Take the job." He says, "I'd rather be the president of a $25 million company versus the president of a vice president of 500 million. That, and I knew for a fact he didn't have much regard for my boss, the CEO, but he didn't say that. And I knew it because I had lunch with him. I introduced him. He's one of those guys you wanted to meet. And next morning, Monday morning, I said, "Oh shit, I hope they didn't find someone for the job." I called Manny, the president of the corporation. I said, "Is the job still open?" He said, "Yes." I said, "I'm joining." Changed my life. Here I am, 20, 35-ish, running small company, but 25 million. Well, then it must have been the equivalent of whatever. 23 stores, losing a lot of money. the founder, Richard Liebskin, kind of left and he had a lot of other things to do in his life. And the pressure was on me because they said, I'll never forget, my boss, Manny, said to me, you know, if we don't turn this around, our board of directors is not going to let us buy any more companies. You know, it was hugely successful. I went in, I followed my instincts. I didn't have any training, I didn't have a mentor, but I just did what was inside of me. You can't take an injection to do what I do. You can't take medicine. I think the DNA factor, whatever that is, now the drive was always there, huge drive to escape. I was very competitive. As my friends told me later on, my grade school friends, my high school friends, I was a great athlete. I never felt I was a great athlete. And they said, you were the most competitive kid at PS 76. I think I was trying to not be my father. That's my current thing. And I wanted to succeed, but I didn't, not in an obnoxious way, because I was always, I didn't want to play even now, like I don't play the card. Now, people know who I am, they know what I do, but I still identify always with people who are struggling, or if it's the waiter, the taxi cab driver, an immigrant, they work hard. And that was the world I grew up in. I was the only one in uh, I think my family on my mother's side who went to college, 8 Jewish cousins. And there I was, the only one, and I was the second oldest, but none of them, go figure it out. There was no educational ethic in a sense, if that's the right word. And thank God I got into science. Everyone went, the Jews all went to City College. I didn't know anyone in fancy. And if you lived in Riverdale, you were the fancy one. I had one close friend. Oh my God, a 3-bedroom apartment. Anyway, Ann Taylor, I spent 4.5 years there. I learned a ton. I'm speaking at Parsons School of Design tonight. I love speaking to students because no one tells them the truth. In fact, CEOs, when you read, no one speaks the way CEOs speak on the TV or in the earnings reports. No one ever talks that way. Everyone has a PR person writing this, that. I just do it, and it's funny. To me, the world is getting so back to being authentic or desperate to be authentic because everyone, I mean, you look at the lack of creativity on creative things like forget marketing and advertising. And I'm a big critic of myself first and everything else that goes on. I'm a very tough critic, but I don't get enough. And I think, I don't know, you know more about this. I'm not forgetting my 16 years on the Apple board. I used to use a BlackBerry in the board meetings, and I'm still intimidated. But I don't think, and this is my opinion, I get attacked sometimes if I say it. I don't. I think the world's gotten less creative because of technology. I don't know in your world,
I agree
uh,
with you.
and I see the data. I guess yes, I was on whatever news business show, and someone says the data. I said, data is data. Data is rear view mirror. Okay. I always say that. You probably heard me say all these things, maybe, but I like to look through the windshield and I like to go to where the puck is going, to quote Wayne Gretzky. And one of the keys is being creative, is being inventive, and there's creativity. I don't know if you're a doctor, you're creative, you're a good detective, and so on and so forth. So I left Ann Taylor because we were bought by a big ugly company called Allied Stores. Now, what happens in the world? I don't know if you hear this from your other guests. When a big corporation buys a creative company, they take the soul out of it in a minute. Always. You see Marriott Hotels buys a fancy hotel. All of a sudden, it's a Marriott. So Allied Stores bought Ann Taylor. It was the saddest day in my life. I loved my job, but I stayed for 4+ years, and they were total bureaucrats. Uh, they were guys who went to the Yale Club to drink, and then they wanted to be involved in the business. And this is a big tell, and it might not mean anything to you. Ann Taylor became a very hot, successful company. But I had to leave at some point because who the hell wanted to work with these whatever? So, and the typical thing is they said, Ann Taylor, I have a prestigious thing, the designer business today, forget it, but the prices and all that. But Ann Taylor became a cool business for the woman working. It was just cool. And and they asked me to put on every shopping bag a unit of Allied stores. Now, I don't know if you know what that means, but it's kind of like bragging about that downscale business owns an upscale business. I look at Range Rover ads. I know this is minor, and I'm a very minutia minor operator because you have to be, or else you don't know what the big deals are. People say, "Oh, you're a micromanager." Proudly so. So I look at the Range Rover thing. I cut it out. I showed the team, but no one really understands. It said Range Rover, they have a beautiful, fancy Range Rover. Everyone drives this, so I don't want to be caught dead in one, but they're great cards. My kid has one and da da da. So it says Range Rover, this is in the small dash Jaguar Corporation. And I said, why the hell would you brag about Jaguar? It used to be 50 years ago, a great car.
Yeah,
You
and
brought
today.
down, now I'm going to fast forward because I'm going to stop this part. Now, I don't know if you read the Old Navy naming story. Did you?
Yes, the bar.
Yeah. Oh, I don't know if you read what happened with my founder and the board of directors with the bar name. I found it. I looked, I was on the Rue Saint Germain. I said to my woman with me, we're looking for a name. The way that company started is a great story, but maybe if you ever have time for episode 2. So I'm driving to the airport. I'm in the back seat, and I see a marquee with all these neon lights. So I'm looking. Old Navy. It's a fucking dive bar. So named it that. My chairman did not like the name. I named my kids Catherine and Alex. I didn't have to. The only one who had to like it was my wife.